Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
There is a question that quietly lingers in the minds of many people on the twin flame journey. If this connection is truly destined, if two souls are meant to find each other across lifetimes, then why does union take so long? Why does it sometimes feel as if the universe itself keeps placing obstacles between two people who clearly share something deeper than ordinary love? Many spiritual teachings describe twin flame union as something inevitable. They speak about divine timing, soul contracts, and the idea that two halves of the same soul will eventually reunite no matter what. But what if the truth is more complex than that? What if union is not simply about destiny? What if union is actually about readiness? And what if the biggest reason union has not happened yet is because one person in the connection is still running? This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of the twin flame journey. People often assume that separation is caused by external circumstances, distance, other relationships, life responsibilities, bad timing, or even karmic interference. Yet when we look deeper at the energetic dynamics between twin flames, we begin to notice something important. Separation rarely happens because two souls are not meant to be together. It happens because one or both individuals are not yet ready to face the transformation the connection demands. The twin flame connection is not a simple romantic bond. It is not just about compatibility, attraction, or emotional chemistry. It is a mirror. And sometimes that mirror shows us parts of ourselves we are not ready to see. When two twin flames meet, something extraordinary begins to unfold. There is often an instant recognition, a feeling that the connection goes far beyond the present moment. Many people describe it as if they have known this person forever. Conversations feel effortless. Emotions feel intensified. Time together feels strangely familiar. At first, everything may feel magical, but then something unexpected begins to happen. The deeper the connection becomes, the more it begins to activate hidden wounds within both individuals. Old fears surface. Unhealed emotional patterns rise to the surface. Past traumas that were once buried suddenly become impossible to ignore. And this is where the journey takes a turn that many people never expect. Instead of moving closer together, one person begins to pull away. The connection that once felt beautiful and safe suddenly feels overwhelming. The intensity becomes too much. And slowly, quietly, one person begins to run. This is where the well-known dynamic of the twin flame journey begins, the runner and the chaser. But to truly understand why union cannot happen while one person is running, we must first understand something deeper. Running is not simply about rejecting the connection. Running is usually about rejecting the transformation that the connection requires. The twin flame connection does something that very few relationships ever do. It exposes the deepest layers of the self. Imagine looking into a mirror that not only reflects your strengths, but also every insecurity you have ever tried to hide. Your fear of abandonment, your fear of intimacy, your fear of losing control, your fear of not being good enough. For many people, this kind of emotional exposure feels terrifying. Even if they deeply care about their twin flame, the intensity of the connection forces them to confront parts of themselves they have spent years avoiding. So they do what many human beings naturally do when faced with something overwhelming. They run. Not necessarily because they do not care. Not necessarily because the connection is not real. But because the connection feels too powerful to handle at that moment in their life. And here is where one of the biggest misunderstandings about twin flames begins. When someone becomes the runner in the connection, the other person often interprets this as rejection. They may think, if this person truly loved me, they wouldn't leave. If this connection is real, why are they running? Why does it feel like I'm the only one fighting for this relationship? These questions are natural. The pain of separation can feel incredibly confusing. But the truth is that the runner is often experiencing just as much internal turmoil as the chaser, if not more. Because while the chaser feels the pain of distance, the runner feels the weight of avoidance. They may try to distract themselves with work, other relationships, or new environments. They may convince themselves that leaving the connection was the right decision. But deep down, something inside them knows the truth. This connection is not something that can easily be forgotten. It lingers. It echoes. It quietly follows them through different phases of life. And yet, even though the connection remains present beneath the surface, union still cannot happen. Not yet. Because union is not just about love. Union is about alignment. For true union to occur, both individuals must reach a level of emotional and energetic stability where the connection can exist without triggering constant fear, avoidance, or imbalance. If one person is still running from the connection, from vulnerability, or from their own healing, the energetic field between the two remains unstable. Imagine trying to hold hands with someone who keeps pulling their hand away. No matter how strong the bond between you is, the connection cannot stabilize until both people are willing to stay present. This is why twin flame union cannot occur while the runner is still running. It is not punishment. It is not failure. It is simply the natural result of energetic imbalance. The journey is not about forcing someone to stay. It is not about convincing the runner to come back. And it is not about proving the connection is real. The journey is about transformation. Both individuals must grow into the versions of themselves who are capable of sustaining such an intense connection. And sometimes that transformation requires time. Time for healing. Time for self-discovery. Time for both people to face the parts of themselves they once tried to avoid. The runner must eventually confront their fears. The chaser must eventually release their need to chase. Only when both individuals reach a place of inner balance does something extraordinary begin to happen. The dynamic changes. The chasing stops. The running slows. And for the first time, both people begin to stand still. But that moment of stillness, that moment of balance, is something that cannot be rushed. Because the truth about twin flame union is this. Union does not happen simply because two souls are meant to be together. Union happens when two souls are finally ready to meet each other without fear. And until that moment arrives, the journey continues. Not as a punishment, but as a path toward becoming whole. One of the most well-known patterns in the twin flame journey is something often called the runner-chaser dynamic. It appears in countless stories shared by people who have experienced intense spiritual connections. At first glance, it may seem like a simple relationship pattern. One person pulls away while the other tries to hold the connection together. But when we look deeper, we begin to see that this dynamic is far more complex than it seems. In fact, the runner-chaser dynamic is not just about behavior. It is about energy, emotional readiness, and inner healing. To understand why union cannot happen when one person is still running, we first need to understand how this dynamic begins. When twin flames first meet, there is often an immediate sense of recognition. Many people describe it as an unexplainable familiarity, as if they have somehow known this person long before the moment they met. Conversations feel effortless. Emotions feel amplified. Even silence between them can feel deeply meaningful. For a while, the connection may feel like the most beautiful thing either person has ever experienced. But beneath that beauty lies an intensity that few people are prepared for. The twin flame connection does not only bring out love and joy. It also activates hidden emotional wounds that may have been buried for years. Fears that once stayed quietly in the background suddenly come to the surface. Fear of abandonment. Fear of rejection. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of losing independence. These fears do not appear randomly. They are triggered because the connection touches something incredibly deep within both individuals. At this point, the journey often begins to split into two different paths. One person becomes the runner. The other becomes the chaser. But these labels can be misleading if we think of them in a simplistic way. The runner is not always someone who does not care. And the chaser is not always someone who is stronger or more committed. Instead, these roles reflect different ways of responding to emotional intensity. The runner is usually the person who feels overwhelmed by the depth of the connection. The emotional exposure feels too powerful, too fast, or too unfamiliar. Even if they feel a strong bond with their twin flame, the vulnerability required by the connection may trigger their deepest fears. So the runner pulls away. Sometimes this happens suddenly. They may stop communicating. They may create physical distance. They may say they need space. They may even enter other relationships or immerse themselves in work, distractions, or new environments. From the outside, it can look as if they are simply abandoning the connection. But internally, the runner is often dealing with something much more complicated. The connection may awaken parts of themselves they have never fully explored before. It may challenge long-held beliefs about love, identity, or control. For someone who has spent years protecting themselves emotionally, this level of openness can feel terrifying. So instead of leaning into the transformation, they retreat from it. They run. Now, let us look at the other side of the dynamic. The chaser. The chaser is usually the person who feels deeply drawn toward the connection and wants to maintain it at all costs. When the runner begins to pull away, the chaser often reacts by moving closer. They try to communicate more. They try to fix misunderstandings. They try to remind the runner of the bond they share. Sometimes they even sacrifice their own emotional well-being in an attempt to preserve the relationship. To the chaser, the connection feels too important to lose. But this is where the energetic imbalance begins to grow. Because the more the chaser tries to hold on, the more pressure the runner may feel. And the more pressure the runner feels, the stronger their instinct to escape becomes. This creates a cycle that many people on the twin flame journey know all too well. The chaser moves forward. The runner moves away. The chaser reaches out. The runner withdraws. And the distance between them grows larger. At this stage, many chasers begin to question themselves. They may wonder if they did something wrong. They may blame themselves for the separation. They may try even harder to repair the connection, believing that if they just say the right thing or wait long enough, everything will return to the way it was in the beginning. But the runner-chaser dynamic is not a problem that can be solved through effort alone. It is an energetic pattern that reflects deeper inner work that both individuals must eventually face. The runner must learn to confront their fears instead of avoiding them. The chaser must learn to rediscover their own worth instead of seeking validation through pursuit. Until these lessons begin to unfold, the cycle continues. What makes this dynamic even more complicated is that both individuals are often experiencing the connection in different ways. The chaser may feel the bond consciously and constantly. They think about the runner frequently. They reflect on the meaning of the connection. They search for spiritual explanations and signs that confirm their intuition. Meanwhile, the runner may try to suppress those same feelings. They may convince themselves that the connection was simply a coincidence, or that it was not as significant as it once seemed. But suppression does not erase the connection. It only pushes the emotions deeper into the subconscious. Over time, the runner may notice that memories of their twin flame continue to appear in unexpected moments. Certain songs, places, or experiences may trigger sudden waves of emotion. Even if they attempt to move forward, something within them quietly remembers. And this is why the runner-chaser dynamic is rarely permanent. Eventually, both individuals begin to evolve. The runner cannot run forever without eventually confronting the emotions they tried to avoid. The chaser cannot chase forever without eventually realizing that their happiness cannot depend entirely on another person. This realization marks the beginning of a new phase in the journey, a phase where both individuals begin to turn inward. Instead of focusing solely on the connection, they begin focusing on their own healing. And this is where something important begins to shift. Because the runner-chaser dynamic is not meant to last forever. It exists to trigger growth. It exists to reveal wounds that must be healed. And most importantly, it exists to guide both individuals back to themselves. When the chaser stops chasing and the runner begins facing their fears, the energetic balance between them slowly begins to change. The push and pull softens. The emotional chaos begins to calm. And for the first time since the beginning of the journey, the possibility of true alignment starts to appear. But that alignment cannot happen while the cycle of running and chasing continues. Union does not happen when one person is still trying to escape the connection and the other is still trying to force it. Union happens when both people are finally ready to meet each other without fear, without pursuit, and without resistance. And understanding the runner-chaser dynamic is the first step toward reaching that balance. One of the most painful questions in the twin flame journey is also one of the most misunderstood. Why does the runner run? For the person on the chaser side of the connection, the runner's behavior can feel deeply confusing. One moment, everything seems magical. The connection feels real, powerful, even sacred. There may be deep conversations, emotional vulnerability, and a sense that something extraordinary is unfolding. Then suddenly something changes. The runner becomes distant. Messages become shorter. Calls stop coming. Plans fade away. And eventually, the person who once seemed so present begins to disappear. From the outside, it may look like they simply changed their mind, or that the connection meant more to one person than the other. But the reality is usually far more complicated. The runner is not always running from their twin flame. More often, they are running from what the connection reveals about themselves. To understand this, we need to look at the deeper psychological and emotional layers that the twin flame connection activates. When two twin flames meet, something powerful happens beneath the surface. The connection functions like a mirror, reflecting both light and shadow. The light is easy to recognize. It appears as love, admiration, emotional closeness, and deep understanding. It feels beautiful and affirming. But the shadow is more difficult to face. The shadow includes fears, insecurities, unresolved pain, and emotional wounds that may have been hidden for years. These shadows are not created by the twin flame connection. They already exist within each person. The connection simply brings them to the surface. For some individuals, this sudden emotional exposure can feel overwhelming. Imagine spending years building emotional defenses, learning how to stay strong, independent, and in control of your life. Then suddenly, someone appears who sees through all of those defenses. Someone who recognizes your vulnerabilities. Someone whose presence makes it impossible to hide your true emotions. For many people, this level of emotional intimacy is unfamiliar territory. And unfamiliar territory often triggers fear. One of the most common reasons runners pull away is fear of vulnerability. Opening your heart completely to another person requires a level of trust that not everyone is ready for. It means allowing someone to see the parts of you that you usually keep hidden. Your insecurities, your doubts, your emotional scars. For someone who has spent years protecting themselves, this can feel like stepping into a storm without any shelter. So instead of leaning into that vulnerability, they retreat from it. They convince themselves that distance is safer. Another powerful reason the runner may pull away is fear of losing control. Many people build their lives around structure and independence. They create routines, goals, and personal identities that give them a sense of stability. But the twin flame connection does not always respect those boundaries. It can appear unexpectedly. It can disrupt carefully planned paths. It can introduce emotions that feel impossible to manage. For someone who values control over their life, this experience can feel threatening. They may ask themselves questions like, what if this connection changes everything? What if I lose the life I've worked so hard to build? What if I become emotionally dependent on someone else? Rather than risk losing control, they choose distance. But perhaps one of the deepest reasons runners run is connected to unhealed emotional wounds. Many people carry unresolved pain from their past. Childhood experiences, previous relationships, moments of betrayal or abandonment. These experiences shape the way people approach love. If someone has been hurt deeply before, they may develop protective patterns designed to prevent future pain. They may avoid emotional closeness. They may keep relationships casual or distant. They may leave before they can be left. When the twin flame connection appears, these protective patterns are suddenly challenged. The connection asks them to open their heart again. It asks them to trust. It asks them to believe that love does not have to end in loss. But if those wounds have not been healed, trusting again can feel impossible. So they run. Another factor that often influences the runner's behavior is the intensity of the connection itself. Twin flame connections are rarely gentle. They tend to feel powerful, consuming, and life-changing. For some people, that intensity feels exciting and meaningful. For others, it feels overwhelming. Imagine standing at the edge of an ocean during a powerful storm. The waves are beautiful, but they are also enormous. You know that stepping into the water could change everything. Some people are ready to dive in. Others instinctively step back. The runner is often the one who steps back, not because the ocean is not beautiful, but because the waves feel too strong to handle. There is also an important truth that many people overlook. Running does not mean the runner does not feel the connection. In many cases, the runner feels it just as strongly as the chaser does. But instead of moving toward those feelings, they try to suppress them. They may distract themselves with work. They may start new relationships. They may convince themselves that what they experienced was simply infatuation or coincidence. Yet despite these efforts, something inside them continues to remember. Memories appear unexpectedly. Dreams bring back familiar emotions. Certain songs, places, or conversations remind them of the connection they tried to leave behind. This is because the twin flame connection operates on a deeper level than ordinary relationships. It is not easily forgotten. But remembering the connection does not automatically mean the runner is ready to face it. Healing takes time, and transformation cannot be forced. This is one of the most difficult lessons for the chaser to accept. Love alone cannot force someone to confront their fears. No amount of waiting, convincing, or sacrificing can complete someone else's healing journey. The runner must eventually make that choice for themselves. They must decide that facing their fears is less painful than continuing to avoid them. And that realization often comes slowly. Sometimes it arrives after many months. Sometimes after years. Sometimes after life experiences that force them to reevaluate their emotional patterns. But eventually something begins to change. The distance that once felt safe begins to feel empty. The distractions that once seemed comforting begin to lose their meaning. And the emotions they tried to suppress begin to resurface. This is the moment when the runner's journey of healing truly begins. But until that moment arrives, the running continues. Not as a sign that the connection is meaningless. Not as proof that union will never happen. But as evidence that one person in the connection is still learning how to face themselves. Because in the twin flame journey, the real challenge is not loving another person. The real challenge is becoming brave enough to face your own heart. And for the runner, that courage takes time to grow. While much attention is often placed on the runner in the twin flame journey, there is another side of the story that carries its own deep emotional weight. The role of the chaser is rarely easy, and for many people it becomes one of the most transformative and painful parts of the entire experience. To understand this role, we must first understand how the chaser begins their journey. In many twin flame connections, the chaser is usually the person who remains emotionally present when the runner begins to withdraw. When the connection first forms, both individuals may feel the intensity. Both may feel the magnetic pull that draws them together. But when the runner begins to feel overwhelmed and pulls away, the chaser often reacts in the opposite way. Instead of stepping back, the chaser moves closer. Instead of creating distance, the chaser tries to preserve the bond. From the chaser's perspective, the connection feels too real, too meaningful, and too rare to simply walk away from. They remember the moments of deep understanding, the conversations that felt different from anything they had experienced before, and the feeling that the universe had somehow brought them together for a reason. So when the runner leaves, the chaser is left with a painful question. How can something that felt so real suddenly disappear? For many chasers, this confusion turns into determination. They begin searching for answers, trying to understand what went wrong and how the connection might be restored. They may replay past conversations in their mind, analyzing every word. They may send messages hoping to reopen communication. They may wait patiently, believing that the runner simply needs time. At first, this response feels natural. When something valuable seems to be slipping away, most people instinctively try to hold on to it. But over time, The chaser often finds themselves caught in a cycle that becomes emotionally exhausting. They begin to measure their days by the presence or absence of the runner. A message brings hope. Silence brings doubt. Memories bring longing. And slowly, the chaser's emotional world starts revolving around someone who is no longer fully present. This is where the role of the chaser becomes deeply painful. Because the more they try to maintain the connection, the more they begin to feel the weight of imbalance. Love starts to feel one-sided. Effort feels unequal. And yet, the chaser continues to believe that if they just try harder, the connection will return to the way it once was. Many chasers convince themselves that persistence is proof of love. They believe that loyalty, patience, and devotion will eventually inspire the runner to come back. But the truth is more complicated. The act of chasing often strengthens the very dynamic that keeps the connection unstable. When one person continues reaching forward while the other continues stepping back, a pattern forms. The chaser becomes associated with pressure, expectation, and emotional intensity. Even if the chaser's intentions are loving, the runner may feel overwhelmed by the constant pull toward the connection. And so the cycle continues. The more the chaser reaches out, the more the runner retreats. The more the runner retreats, the more desperate the chaser may feel to repair the connection. Over time, this dynamic can begin to erode the chaser's sense of self. They may start questioning their worth. They may wonder if they are somehow not enough. They may compare themselves to others, wondering if someone else could give the runner what they could not. These thoughts can slowly transform love into insecurity. The chaser may sacrifice their own needs in an attempt to keep the connection alive. They may tolerate emotional distance. They may accept inconsistent communication. They may hold on to hope even when reality offers very little reassurance. And this is where one of the most important lessons of the twin flame journey begins to emerge. Because the chaser's role is not meant to last forever. In fact, the purpose of the chaser phase is not to chase at all. It is to awaken. The pain of chasing eventually forces the chaser to confront a difficult truth. Love cannot exist in a healthy form when it is built on imbalance. No relationship can thrive when one person carries the entire emotional weight while the other continues to withdraw. At some point, the chaser begins to feel exhausted. The waiting becomes heavy. The uncertainty becomes overwhelming. And the heart that once held endless patience begins asking a new question. What about me? This question marks the beginning of a profound shift in the chaser's journey. Instead of focusing entirely on the runner, the chaser begins turning inward. They begin asking themselves why they felt compelled to chase so intensely. Why did they feel responsible for holding the connection together? Why did they believe that their love alone could fix everything? These questions often reveal deeper emotional patterns. Sometimes the chaser carries a strong desire to be needed. Sometimes they have experienced abandonment in the past and fear losing someone again. Sometimes they believe that love must be proven through sacrifice and persistence. But as the chaser begins exploring these patterns, something important becomes clear. The journey is not only about the runner's healing. It is also about the chaser's growth. The chaser must learn that their worth does not depend on being chosen by someone else. They must rediscover the parts of themselves that existed before the connection consumed their emotional world. They must rebuild their sense of identity, independence, and inner peace. This transformation is not easy. Letting go of the chase can feel like letting go of the connection itself. For a long time, the chaser may believe that if they stop pursuing the runner, the bond will disappear forever. But the truth is quite the opposite. Stopping the chase does not destroy the connection. It restores balance. When the chaser finally begins focusing on their own healing, something remarkable begins to happen. The energetic pressure between the two individuals starts to dissolve. The constant push toward the runner fades. The emotional intensity softens. And the chaser begins reclaiming their power. They invest energy into their own life again. They reconnect with passions, friendships, and personal goals. They learn to create happiness that does not depend on another person's presence. This stage of the journey is often called the chaser's awakening. It is the moment when the chaser realizes that the purpose of the connection was never to lose themselves in another person. It was to find themselves again. Ironically, this shift is also the moment when the dynamic between the runner and the chaser begins to change. Because when the chaser stops chasing, the energetic roles start to rebalance. The runner no longer feels the same pressure to escape. The emotional distance that once felt necessary begins to lose its purpose. And slowly, the connection begins transforming into something different. But this transformation cannot happen while the chaser is still trying to force the outcome. True balance only begins when the chaser releases the need to control the journey. Because the most powerful realization of all is this: the chaser was never meant to spend their life chasing someone else. They were meant to become someone who no longer needs to chase love at all. For many people on the twin flame journey, one of the most confusing questions is this: if two souls are truly meant to be together, why doesn't union happen sooner? Why do so many twin flame connections go through long periods of separation, silence, and emotional distance? Why does it sometimes feel like the closer one person tries to move toward union, the further it seems to move away? At first glance, it can seem unfair. Two people discover a connection that feels rare, meaningful, and spiritually significant. Yet instead of moving naturally toward a stable relationship, they find themselves trapped in cycles of distance and misunderstanding. But when we begin to understand the deeper energetic nature of the twin flame journey, a different picture begins to emerge. Union is not simply the result of destiny. Union is the result of alignment. And alignment cannot exist when one person is still running. To understand why, we need to step back and look at the connection from a broader perspective. Most traditional relationships are built on compatibility. Two people share similar interests, values, or lifestyles, and over time they develop a bond based on mutual understanding and emotional support. The twin flame connection operates on a completely different level. Instead of simply bringing two people together, the connection acts as a catalyst for deep personal transformation. It accelerates emotional growth. It exposes unresolved wounds. It challenges both individuals to confront parts of themselves that they may have ignored for years. This is why the connection often feels so intense from the beginning. It is not just about love. It is about evolution. But transformation requires readiness. If one person in the connection is still avoiding the inner work that the relationship demands, the energy between the two cannot stabilize. Imagine trying to balance a scale with equal weight on both sides. If one side is constantly shifting or pulling away, the balance can never settle. This is exactly what happens during the running phase. The runner is still in a state of avoidance. They may not consciously realize it, but their actions reflect a deeper resistance to the emotional changes that the connection requires. They may fear vulnerability. They may fear losing control of their life. They may fear confronting past wounds that the connection has brought to the surface. As long as these fears remain unaddressed, their instinct is to create distance. This distance may appear in many forms: physical distance, emotional detachment, limited communication, or even the decision to pursue other relationships. Each of these behaviors serves the same purpose: to reduce the intensity of the connection. From the runner's perspective, this distance creates temporary relief. It allows them to regain a sense of control and avoid confronting emotions that feel overwhelming. But from an energetic perspective, something very important is happening. The connection becomes unstable. Twin flame union requires both individuals to remain energetically present with each other. Presence means emotional honesty. It means the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. It means staying open even when vulnerability feels frightening. But when the runner is still in avoidance mode, that presence cannot exist. The energetic bridge between the two individuals keeps shifting. Every time the chaser moves closer, the runner pulls away. Every time the runner creates distance, the chaser feels compelled to close the gap. This constant movement prevents the connection from reaching a stable state. To understand this more clearly, imagine trying to build a bridge between two cliffs. If both sides remain steady, the builders can slowly extend the structure until the two sides meet in the middle. But if one side keeps moving further away, the bridge can never be completed. No matter how much effort is applied from one side, the structure will remain unfinished. This is exactly why union cannot happen during the running phase. Union is not simply the physical reunion of two people. It is the creation of a stable energetic field between them. That field requires emotional maturity from both individuals. It requires both people to face their fears instead of avoiding them. It requires both people to take responsibility for their healing. When one person is still running, that stability cannot exist. Even if the two individuals temporarily come back into contact, the unresolved fears will eventually reappear. The same triggers will surface again. The same emotional patterns will repeat themselves, and the cycle of distance will begin once more. This is why many twin flame connections experience multiple periods of separation before reaching true union. Each phase of separation serves a purpose. It gives both individuals the opportunity to grow independently. It gives the runner time to confront the fears that once pushed them away. It gives the chaser time to rediscover their self-worth and release the need to control the connection. Without this individual growth, union would simply recreate the same imbalances that caused the separation in the first place. Another important aspect of this process is timing. Healing cannot be rushed. The runner cannot be forced to face their fears before they are ready. The chaser cannot force union through persistence or patience alone. Both individuals must arrive at a place of inner stability on their own. This often requires experiences outside of the connection. Life lessons, personal challenges, moments of reflection that gradually shift their perspective. Over time, the runner may begin to realize that avoiding the connection has not truly solved anything. The emotions they tried to escape may still exist beneath the surface. The connection may continue appearing in dreams, memories, or unexpected moments of reflection. And slowly, the distance that once felt safe begins to feel empty. At the same time, the chaser may begin to recognize that their life cannot revolve around waiting for someone else to return. They begin investing energy into their own growth. They rebuild their sense of independence. They discover happiness that exists beyond the connection. These parallel transformations are what eventually prepare both individuals for union. But they cannot occur while the running phase continues. The running phase is a period of resistance. Union requires acceptance. The running phase is driven by fear. Union is sustained by courage. The running phase is defined by imbalance. Union is defined by harmony. Until both individuals reach a place where they are no longer running from the connection, from vulnerability, or from themselves, the energy between them cannot fully settle. And this is why the journey often takes time. Not because the connection is weak, but because the transformation it requires is profound. Union is not simply the reward for finding your twin flame. It is the natural result of becoming the version of yourself who is capable of sustaining such a powerful bond. And that transformation cannot happen while someone is still trying to run away from it. For a long time in the twin flame journey, it can seem as though the runner will never stop running. From the chaser's perspective, the distance may feel endless. Messages remain unanswered. Conversations that once felt deep and meaningful fade into silence. The connection that once felt alive and vibrant begins to feel like a memory. During this phase, many chasers quietly ask themselves a painful question. Will the runner ever change? Will they ever face the emotions they keep avoiding? The truth is that the runner's journey is often happening in ways that are not immediately visible. Just because the runner appears distant on the outside does not mean that nothing is happening within them. In fact, some of the most important transformations in the twin flame journey occur silently, beneath the surface of daily life. The runner's healing rarely begins with a dramatic moment of realization. More often, it begins slowly, through subtle shifts in awareness that accumulate over time. At first, the runner may believe that distancing themselves from the connection solved the problem. They may feel temporary relief. Without the constant emotional intensity of the connection, life appears simpler. They regain a sense of control over their routine. Their emotions feel quieter, more manageable. But something unusual begins to happen as time passes. Despite their efforts to move forward, the memory of the connection does not fade as easily as expected. Certain moments bring it back unexpectedly. A familiar song, a random conversation that echoes something once shared, a place that reminds them of a memory, or a quiet evening when their thoughts wander back to someone they once tried to forget. These moments can feel confusing. The runner may wonder why the connection still occupies space in their mind when they have already chosen to leave it behind. At first, they may dismiss these thoughts. They may convince themselves that nostalgia is normal. But over time, the emotional weight of these memories begins to grow. They may begin asking themselves questions they once avoided. Why did this connection feel different from anything else? Why does it still feel unresolved? Why does it continue to appear in their thoughts even when they try to move forward? These questions mark the earliest stage of the runner's awakening. The walls they built around their emotions begin to crack, allowing reflection to enter. This does not mean they immediately return to the connection. Healing rarely moves that quickly. Instead, the runner begins confronting aspects of themselves that the connection originally revealed. They may start recognizing patterns in their relationships. Perhaps they notice that they often withdraw when emotional closeness becomes too strong. Perhaps they realize that vulnerability has always made them uncomfortable. Perhaps they begin to understand that their instinct to run was not just about the twin flame connection, but about deeper fears that existed long before it appeared. This stage of awareness can feel unsettling. For someone who has spent years avoiding emotional exposure, suddenly recognizing these patterns can feel like standing in front of a mirror that cannot be ignored. Some runners may resist this realization for a while. They may try to distract themselves with work, travel, or new relationships. But eventually, life begins presenting situations that force them to face the same lessons again and again. A new relationship may reveal the same emotional triggers. A moment of vulnerability may bring back familiar fears. A conversation with a friend or a therapist may open the door to deeper reflection. Gradually, the runner begins understanding that running away did not eliminate the underlying issues. It only postponed them. And once this realization takes root, the healing process truly begins. Healing for the runner often involves confronting the fears that originally caused them to withdraw. Fear of intimacy, fear of abandonment, fear of emotional dependency, fear of losing control. These fears may have been shaped by childhood experiences, past heartbreak, or long-standing beliefs about love and vulnerability. Facing them requires courage. For the runner, this is one of the most difficult stages of the journey. It requires them to acknowledge that their instinct to escape was not necessarily protecting them. Instead, it may have prevented them from experiencing the depth of connection they secretly longed for. At this stage, the runner may begin exploring personal growth in ways they never considered before. They might begin journaling their thoughts and emotions. They might seek guidance from therapy, spiritual practices, or self-reflection. They might start questioning the beliefs they once held about relationships and emotional closeness. These steps may seem small, but they represent profound internal change. For the first time, the runner is no longer simply reacting to fear. They are beginning to understand it. And understanding fear is the first step toward transforming it. Another important shift begins to occur during this stage. The runner starts recognizing the impact their actions had on the connection. They may remember moments when the chaser tried to communicate honestly. They may reflect on the times they avoided difficult conversations or withdrew instead of expressing their feelings. This realization can bring a mixture of emotions: regret,
curiosity,
and sometimes even gratitude for the person who once challenged them to face themselves. But the runner's healing is not about guilt. It is about growth. The purpose of this stage is not to punish them for past actions, but to guide them toward emotional maturity. As they continue this journey inward, something remarkable begins to happen. The intensity that once scared them no longer feels as threatening. Instead of seeing the connection as something overwhelming, they begin seeing it as something meaningful, something that awakened parts of themselves they never fully understood before. The idea of vulnerability slowly begins to change. What once felt dangerous begins to feel necessary. What once felt overwhelming begins to feel transformative. And this is when the runner truly begins to stop running. Not because someone forced them to return, not because the chaser continued waiting, but because they have finally begun facing the parts of themselves that once drove them away. It is important to remember that this process often happens quietly. The chaser may not see these changes immediately. The runner may still appear distant for a while, but internally something significant has shifted. The person who once avoided emotional depth is slowly learning how to embrace it. The person who once ran from vulnerability is slowly discovering the strength required to face it. And as this healing unfolds, the energetic dynamic between the runner and the chaser begins to change. Because when the runner stops running from themselves, they also stop running from the connection. This does not guarantee immediate reunion, but it creates the conditions that make union possible. For the first time in the journey, the energy of avoidance begins transforming into the energy of awareness. And awareness is where real transformation begins. For a long time in the twin flame journey, the chaser believes that their role is to hold on. Hold on to the connection. Hold on to the memories. Hold on to the hope that one day everything will return to the way it once felt. At the beginning of the journey, this instinct feels natural. When you experience a connection that feels rare, intense, and spiritually meaningful, letting go seems almost impossible. The bond feels too important to abandon. So the chaser does what their heart tells them to do. They stay. They wait. They hope. They try to keep the connection alive, even when the other person has stepped away. But as time passes, something begins to change. The waiting becomes heavier. The uncertainty grows. The emotional energy required to keep hoping begins to feel exhausting. And eventually, a quiet realization begins to form inside the chaser's heart. Love should not feel like constant pursuit. This realization marks the beginning of one of the most powerful transformations in the entire twin flame journey. The chaser begins to understand that the purpose of the connection was never to make them chase someone endlessly. It was to awaken them. At first, this awakening can feel painful. For months or even years, the chaser may have believed that persistence was the key to union. They believed that if they loved deeply enough, waited patiently enough, or sacrificed enough of themselves, the runner would eventually return. But now they begin to see the situation from a different perspective. They begin to notice how much of their life has been placed on hold. How many days have passed waiting for a message? How many nights were spent replaying memories? How many decisions were influenced by the hope that the runner might come back? Slowly, the chaser begins asking a new question. What about my life? This question is not born from bitterness. It comes from awakening, because the chaser finally realizes that their life cannot remain paused indefinitely while waiting for someone else to heal. This moment can feel both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying, because letting go of the chase feels like letting go of the connection itself. Liberating, because it opens the door to reclaiming personal power. For the first time since the separation began, the chaser begins turning their attention inward instead of outward. Instead of constantly wondering what the runner is doing, they begin asking themselves deeper questions. Why did I feel responsible for saving this connection? Why did I believe that love meant sacrificing my own emotional stability? Why did I feel the need to chase someone who is not ready to stay? These questions often reveal emotional patterns that existed long before the twin flame connection appeared. Some chasers discover that they have always been the one who tries to fix relationships. Others realize that they fear abandonment so deeply that they struggle to walk away, even when a connection becomes painful. Some may recognize that they learned early in life to prove their worth by giving more than they receive. The twin flame journey exposes these patterns with remarkable clarity. And once the chaser becomes aware of them, something important begins to shift. They begin to understand that chasing was never about the runner alone. It was also about their own relationship with self-worth. The moment the chaser begins reclaiming that self-worth, the entire dynamic starts to transform. Instead of constantly reaching outward, they begin investing energy into themselves again. They reconnect with passions that once brought them joy. They rebuild friendships that may have been neglected during the emotional intensity of the journey. They explore personal goals that have nothing to do with the connection. This process is not about forgetting the runner. It is about remembering themselves. For a long time, the chaser may have felt that their happiness depended on whether the runner returned. Now they begin discovering that happiness can exist independently of the connection. They learn to create peace within their own life. They learn to enjoy moments without constantly wondering what the future will bring. They learn that love for another person does not require abandoning love for themselves. And as this transformation unfolds, something unexpected begins to happen. The emotional urgency that once defined the connection begins to fade. The chaser no longer feels the constant need to chase answers, explanations, or reassurance. Instead of asking, "When will they come back?" they begin asking, "What do I need to grow?" Instead of focusing on the runner's healing, they begin focusing on their own. This shift may seem small, but energetically it is profound. Because the runner-chaser dynamic depends on imbalance. It exists because one person is pursuing while the other is retreating. But when the chaser stops chasing, the imbalance begins to dissolve. The energetic pressure that once pushed the runner away begins to disappear. For the first time, the connection exists without constant pursuit. This does not mean the runner immediately returns. But the dynamic changes in a subtle and powerful way. The chaser is no longer defined by longing. They are defined by growth. They are no longer waiting for life to begin again. They are living it. And this stage of the journey often surprises many chasers. Because the moment they stop chasing is often the moment they feel the most peace. They begin realizing that the purpose of the connection was never simply to reunite with another person. It was to guide them toward their own wholeness. The runner acted as a catalyst, triggering emotional wounds that needed healing. But the healing itself belongs to the chaser. Through this process, they become stronger, wiser, and more emotionally balanced. They develop a deeper understanding of love that goes beyond attachment. They learn that true love does not require forcing someone to stay. It does not require constant effort to maintain. Real love exists in freedom. Freedom to grow. Freedom to evolve. Freedom to choose connection without fear or obligation. And when the chaser reaches this level of inner balance, something extraordinary happens. They no longer feel incomplete without the runner. They no longer believe that union is the only path to happiness. They become whole on their own. Ironically, this state of wholeness is exactly what the twin flame journey was meant to create. Because true union cannot happen between two people who feel incomplete. It can only happen between two individuals who have already discovered their own inner stability. The chaser's transformation is the moment when that stability begins to emerge. And once the chase ends, the entire journey begins to shift in a new direction. The energy becomes calmer. The connection becomes less about longing and more about understanding. And for the first time, both souls begin moving toward balance instead of imbalance. The chaser finally realizes a powerful truth. They were never meant to spend their life chasing love. They were meant to become someone who attracts it naturally by simply being whole. There comes a moment in the twin flame journey when something subtle yet powerful begins to change. For a long time, the connection may have felt like a constant storm, an emotional push and pull that seemed impossible to control. One person ran, the other chased. One pulled away, the other reached forward. The dynamic created waves of hope, confusion, longing, and sometimes even heartbreak. But the journey was never meant to remain in that storm forever. Eventually, something shifts. The runner begins healing. The chaser begins letting go. And when both of these transformations happen, even if they occur at different speeds, an energetic recalibration begins to unfold between the two souls. This stage is often quiet. It does not always involve dramatic reunions or sudden conversations. In fact, it may happen during a period when the two individuals are still physically apart. Yet, internally, everything is changing. The energy that once fueled the runner-chaser dynamic begins to dissolve. To understand why this happens, we must first understand the role that energetic imbalance played in the earlier stages of the journey. When the chaser was pursuing and the runner was escaping, the energy between them was unstable. It functioned like two magnets pushing against each other in opposite directions. The more one moved forward, the more the other instinctively moved back. This was not simply about behavior. It was about the emotional frequencies both individuals were operating from. The chaser's energy was often rooted in longing, attachment, and the desire to hold onto the connection. The runner's energy was often rooted in fear, avoidance, and the instinct to protect themselves from emotional intensity. These two emotional states could not create balance. They created tension. But as healing begins, both individuals start shifting into new emotional spaces. The chaser, who once felt the need to pursue the connection at all costs, begins rediscovering their independence. They learn how to live their life without constantly focusing on the runner's actions or absence. They invest energy into their own growth, happiness, and purpose. They rebuild the parts of themselves that may have been overshadowed by the intensity of the journey. Instead of longing for completion through another person, they begin cultivating inner wholeness. This change is profound, because the moment the chaser stops chasing, the energetic pressure on the runner begins to disappear. Meanwhile, the runner is going through their own transformation. The fears that once drove them to escape are slowly being examined and understood. They begin recognizing the emotional patterns that shaped their responses to intimacy. They begin realizing that vulnerability is not the same as weakness. They begin questioning the walls they once built to protect themselves. And as those walls slowly come down, the runner's relationship with the connection begins to change. The intensity that once frightened them no longer feels as overwhelming. The emotional depth that once triggered avoidance begins to feel meaningful. Instead of seeing the connection as something they must escape from, they begin seeing it as something that awakened important growth within them. These parallel transformations create the conditions for energetic balance. For the first time since the beginning of the journey, neither person is reacting from fear. The chaser is no longer pursuing. The runner is no longer fleeing. Both individuals are standing still within their own personal growth. This moment of stillness is incredibly significant, because balance does not come from movement. It comes from stability. Imagine a lake after a powerful storm. For hours, the wind may have created waves and turbulence across the surface of the water. But when the wind finally calms, the water gradually becomes smooth again. The reflection becomes clear. The lake returns to its natural state of balance. The energetic rebalancing between twin flames works in a similar way. When the emotional storms of chasing and running finally settle, the connection begins to stabilize. This does not mean the past disappears. Both individuals still carry the memories, lessons, and growth that emerged from the earlier phases of the journey. But the emotional intensity that once caused chaos is replaced with a sense of clarity. The chaser no longer feels desperate for reunion. The runner no longer feels compelled to escape. Instead, both begin recognizing the deeper purpose of the journey. It was never just about being together. It was about becoming whole. And once that wholeness begins to develop within both individuals, the nature of the connection changes. Instead of functioning as a trigger for unresolved wounds, the connection becomes a reflection of growth. Communication, if it resumes, feels calmer and more authentic. There is less pressure, less expectation, less emotional urgency. Instead of trying to control the outcome of the relationship, both individuals begin allowing life to unfold naturally. This stage is sometimes misunderstood by those who are still earlier in the journey. Some people believe that union will arrive suddenly once healing begins. But energetic balance does not always produce immediate physical reunion. What it creates first is alignment. Alignment means that both individuals are now capable of interacting with each other without repeating the same painful patterns. They can face each other without the need to run. They can connect without the need to chase. They can communicate without the emotional instability that once defined their interactions. In many ways, this stage is more important than union itself. Because without energetic balance, union would only recreate the same cycle of separation. The relationship would once again become overwhelmed by fear, attachment, or unresolved wounds. But when balance exists, the connection has a new foundation. It becomes something steady instead of chaotic, something conscious instead of reactive, something built on growth instead of longing. This transformation also changes how both individuals perceive love. Earlier in the journey, love may have felt like a powerful force that controlled their emotions. Now it begins to feel like something calmer and more mature. It becomes less about needing someone to fill an emotional void and more about sharing life with someone who has also learned to stand on their own. In this balanced space, the connection becomes freer. Neither person feels trapped by it. Neither person feels obligated to maintain it through effort alone. Instead, the connection simply exists. And sometimes, this quiet stage of balance is the most beautiful part of the entire journey, because it reveals a truth that was hidden during the earlier chaos. The twin flame connection was never meant to be about suffering. It was meant to guide two souls toward growth, healing, and self-discovery. The running and chasing were simply stages along the path. But now those stages are ending. And for the first time since the beginning of the journey, both souls are standing in the same emotional space. Not as runner and chaser, but as two individuals who have learned how to face themselves. And when that balance is finally reached, something extraordinary becomes possible. The connection is no longer driven by imbalance. It is sustained by harmony. For much of the twin flame journey, union can feel like a distant destination, something that always seems just out of reach. There are moments when it appears close, moments when hope returns, and then moments when separation once again takes center stage. Because of this, many people begin to view union as a specific event. A reunion, a conversation, a moment when two people finally come back together after a long period apart. But the deeper truth of the twin flame journey is that true union is not simply an event. It is a state of alignment. And that alignment can only emerge after the long cycle of running and chasing has finally come to an end. By the time the journey reaches this stage, both individuals have changed in profound ways. The runner is no longer running. The chaser is no longer chasing. And perhaps most importantly, both individuals have spent time confronting the parts of themselves that the connection originally exposed. The runner has faced their fear of vulnerability. They have begun understanding the emotional walls they once built to protect themselves. They may have explored past wounds, questioned old beliefs about love, and learned that intimacy does not always lead to loss or pain. They have slowly developed the courage to remain emotionally present instead of withdrawing when things become intense. Meanwhile, the chaser has undergone an equally powerful transformation. They have rediscovered their sense of self outside of the connection. They have rebuilt their confidence, their independence, and their personal purpose. They have learned that love cannot be sustained through pursuit alone. Instead of defining their happiness by the presence of the runner, they have learned to create peace within their own life. Both individuals have grown. And this growth is the foundation that makes union possible. Because the earlier stages of the journey were defined by imbalance. One person feared emotional closeness. The other feared emotional loss. One avoided vulnerability. The other clung to the connection. These opposing energies created the push and pull dynamic that kept the relationship unstable. But now those energies have transformed. The runner has learned that vulnerability does not destroy independence. The chaser has learned that self-worth does not depend on being chosen. Both individuals have moved closer to emotional balance. And balance is where true union begins. At this stage of the journey, the idea of reunion often looks very different from what either person once imagined. In the earlier phases, union may have felt urgent. The chaser may have dreamed about the moment the runner would finally return, imagining emotional conversations, apologies, or dramatic reunions. But once both individuals have reached a deeper level of healing, the energy around the connection becomes calmer. The urgency fades. The pressure disappears. Instead of longing intensely for reunion, both individuals simply continue living their lives with greater awareness and peace. And ironically, this calmness is often what allows union to naturally unfold. Because union cannot thrive in an atmosphere of emotional desperation. It requires stability. It requires two individuals who are capable of standing firmly within themselves. Imagine two trees growing side by side. If one tree constantly leans against the other for support, both trees become unstable. But if both trees grow strong roots within the earth, they can stand independently while still sharing the same space. The twin flame journey eventually leads both individuals to develop those strong roots. They no longer rely on each other to feel complete. They no longer fear losing themselves in the connection. Instead, they approach the connection with a new level of maturity. If communication begins again during this stage, it often feels different from before. There is less emotional tension, less pressure to define the relationship immediately. Conversations may feel lighter, more authentic, and more grounded in the present moment. Both individuals may notice that the triggers that once caused conflict or avoidance are no longer as powerful. The runner does not feel the same urge to escape. The chaser does not feel the same urge to hold on tightly. Instead, there is space for genuine understanding. But even at this stage, union is not forced. This is one of the most important truths of the twin flame journey. True union cannot be rushed. It emerges naturally when both individuals are ready to meet each other without fear, attachment, or expectation. Sometimes union appears gradually. Two people reconnect as friends. They rebuild trust slowly. They allow the connection to evolve at a comfortable pace. Other times, union may occur more suddenly, when both individuals realize that the emotional barriers that once separated them no longer exist. But regardless of how it unfolds, the defining feature of true union is freedom. Neither person feels trapped by the connection. Neither person feels pressured to maintain it out of obligation. Instead, both individuals choose the connection consciously. They choose to share their lives not because they feel incomplete without each other, but because their lives naturally align. This is a very different form of love from the intense longing that defined the earlier stages of the journey. Earlier, the connection may have felt overwhelming, like a force that controlled their emotions. Now it feels steady, grounded, peaceful. It becomes less about destiny and more about presence. Two people who once triggered each other's deepest fears now support each other's growth. Two people who once struggled with imbalance now stand as equals. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this stage is that union no longer feels like the only outcome that matters. Both individuals have already discovered their own inner wholeness. They have learned how to live meaningful lives independently. They have learned how to love themselves and embrace their personal journeys. Because of this, union becomes something that enhances their lives rather than something required to complete them. The connection transforms from a source of emotional turmoil into a source of mutual understanding. It becomes a partnership between two individuals who have walked through their own shadows and emerged stronger. This is why the twin flame journey often takes time. The purpose of the journey was never simply to reunite two people. It was to transform them. It was to guide both souls through a process of healing, self-discovery, and emotional growth. And when that transformation is complete, union becomes possible, not as a reward for suffering, but as the natural result of two people who have finally learned how to meet each other without fear. Because in the end, true twin flame union is not about finding someone who completes you. It is about meeting someone who reflects the wholeness you have already discovered within yourself. There comes a quiet moment on the twin flame journey that few people talk about. It is not dramatic. There are no fireworks in the sky, no sudden declarations of love. Instead, something much more powerful happens. Both souls stop running. And when that moment arrives, the entire dynamic between them changes. Because the truth is simple yet profound. Union cannot happen while one soul is still trying to escape the mirror. But once both people reach the point where running no longer feels necessary, the energy between them begins to transform in ways that feel almost miraculous. So what really happens when the runner heals? The chaser releases control, and both energies finally come into balance? Let's explore this final stage of the journey, the end of the chase. For much of the twin flame journey, the dynamic revolves around a painful dance. One soul runs, the other chases. The runner feels overwhelmed by the intensity of the connection. The chaser feels desperate to hold on to it. This cycle can repeat for months, years, or even decades. But eventually something shifts. Not because the chaser wins. Not because the runner suddenly realizes everything. Instead, the change begins inside both people. The chaser stops chasing. And surprisingly, that is when the runner begins to slow down.
Why?
Because chasing and running are two sides of the same energetic pattern. When one disappears, the other cannot continue. Imagine trying to run away from someone who is no longer following you. At first, the runner might keep going out of habit, but eventually they turn around. And suddenly, there is silence. No pressure. No pursuit. Just space. And within that space, something powerful begins to grow. The runner's healing journey. Many people misunderstand the role of the runner. They assume the runner does not care, or that they are emotionally unavailable by nature. But the truth is usually far more complicated. Most runners are not running from their twin flame. They are running from the parts of themselves the connection exposes. When a twin flame connection activates, it often triggers deep subconscious wounds. Fear of abandonment. Fear of inadequacy. Fear of losing control. The intensity can feel overwhelming. So the runner does what the nervous system believes is safest. They create distance. But distance does not erase the connection. It only gives the runner time to face what they have been avoiding. Sometimes that healing happens slowly. A breakup with someone else. A difficult life lesson. A moment of loneliness that forces self-reflection. And gradually, the runner begins to understand something they once feared. The connection was never the threat. The real challenge was their own unhealed wounds. As these wounds begin to heal, the runner's perspective shifts. They no longer feel the same urge to escape. Instead of fear, curiosity begins to emerge. Instead of resistance, openness appears. And most importantly, they start moving toward emotional maturity. The chaser's transformation. While the runner is learning to face their fears, the chaser is going through an equally important transformation. At the beginning of the journey, the chaser often believes their mission is to bring the twin flame back. They analyze every sign, every message, every moment of silence. Their mind becomes trapped in questions. Why are they running? What did I do wrong? How can I fix this? But over time, something deeper begins to happen. The chaser realizes that chasing is exhausting, not just physically, but spiritually. They begin to see that constantly focusing on the other person has caused them to neglect their own growth, their dreams, their healing, their life. So slowly, they begin to redirect their energy inward. They start asking different questions. What do I need to heal? What kind of life do I want to create? How can I become whole on my own? And as they walk this path of self-discovery, something incredible happens. The desperate energy disappears. The need for validation fades. The chaser becomes emotionally independent. Ironically, this is the moment when they become most attractive energetically. Not because they are trying to impress the runner, but because they are finally standing in their own power. The moment energy balances. Union begins long before two people physically reunite. It starts with energetic balance. For most of the journey, the twin flame dynamic looks like a tilted scale. One person gives more. One person pulls away. But when both souls begin healing, the scale slowly levels. The runner stops running. The chaser stops chasing. And suddenly both people are standing still. This is a completely new experience for the connection. Instead of tension, there is calm. Instead of longing, there is peace. Instead of attachment, there is acceptance. At this stage, both individuals have learned something essential. Love cannot be forced. It can only be allowed. And when love is allowed instead of chased, it begins to flow naturally again. A story of energy alignment. Consider the story of Maya and Daniel. When they first met, the connection between them felt electric. Within weeks, they felt as if they had known each other forever. But the intensity quickly became overwhelming for Daniel. He began withdrawing. taking longer to respond to messages, avoiding deeper conversations. Eventually, he disappeared completely. Maya was devastated. For months, she tried to understand what went wrong. She replayed their conversations endlessly. But eventually, exhaustion forced her to stop. She began focusing on herself.
She started therapy.
She traveled. She rebuilt parts of her life that had been neglected. And slowly, she stopped waiting. 2 years later, something unexpected happened. Daniel reached out. Not with excuses. Not with promises. Just honesty. He explained that during those 2 years he had faced many things he had been avoiding: family trauma, insecurity, fear of commitment. He told her something simple. I ran because I wasn't ready to face myself. But by the time he returned, Maya was no longer the same person either. She was no longer chasing. She had already built a life she loved. And that changed the entire dynamic between them. Now, if they reunited, it would not be because one needed the other. It would be because both chose it freely. That is the essence of twin flame union. Why timing matters. One of the most difficult lessons on this journey is understanding timing. Many people believe that if two souls are meant to be together, they should unite quickly. But the twin flame journey rarely follows a straight line. Sometimes separation lasts years. Sometimes lifetimes. And while this can feel unfair, there is a deeper reason. Union requires two whole individuals, not two people searching for someone to complete them. If reunion happened too early, the same wounds that caused separation would simply repeat the cycle.
So, the universe waits.
It waits until both souls have grown enough to hold the connection without fear. Until love becomes a choice, not an emotional dependency. The quiet signs union is near. When the final stage approaches, the signs are subtle. The chaser no longer feels desperate. The runner no longer feels the urge to escape. Both people feel a strange sense of calm about the connection. Even if they are physically apart, there is an inner knowing, a quiet trust. They stop trying to control the outcome. Instead, they focus on living fully in the present. And paradoxically, that is when the path toward reunion often opens. Because the energy has finally shifted from attachment to alignment. The true meaning of twin flame union. Many people imagine twin flame union as a perfect romantic ending. But in reality, union is not about romance alone. It is about evolution. Two souls who have faced their shadows. Two individuals who have healed their deepest wounds. Two energies that once triggered chaos, now creating harmony. Union is not the reward for suffering. It is the natural result of growth. And sometimes the most powerful union happens not in a dramatic moment, but in a quiet realization. I am whole, and I choose love anyway. If you are currently on the twin flame journey, remember this. Union does not happen when one person chases hard enough. It happens when both souls become ready. When the runner heals. When the chaser releases attachment. When both individuals stand in their own emotional balance. Because love at its highest level is not about possession. It is about freedom. And when two free souls choose each other, that is when true union begins. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Are you still chasing? Or are you learning to stand in your own energy? Your answer might reveal exactly where you are on the journey. And if this video helped you understand the twin flame path more deeply, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need this reminder today. Sometimes the most powerful transformation begins with a single realization. You were never meant to lose yourself in love. You were meant to become yourself through it.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you.